We open inside a Viking longhouse on the coldest night of the year. The wind claws at the turf walls, the fjord is frozen, and everyone is asleep when the last flames sink into ash. In our modern world, a dead boiler is an emergency. In theirs, this is normal. We walk through the room, the sleeping family, the dim glow of coals, the smell of smoke and dried meat in the rafters. Then we flip the image. This cosy scene is actually a battlefield. Food versus time, hunger versus planning. The real heroes of the Viking age aren't the warriors on ships, but the quiet hands that spent all year preparing for this exact moment. Before the first bite of food appears, we ask, when the world outside is trying to kill you, what do you put in your body to survive? Listen to the house breathe. The storm outside is a living thing, howling over the roof, flinging snow into the darkness, polishing the ice on the frozen fjord until the moonlight turns it to steel. Out there, nothing soft survives. The wind strips heat from skin, draws a sharp line between those who planned well and those who didn't. But inside, for now, there is a pocket of warmth clinging to life. The longhouse stretches like a wooden ship turned upside down and buried halfway into the earth. Thick turf covers the roof, frozen solid, crusted with snow. The walls are planks and wattle, smeared with clay and smoke, patched and repatched by hands that understood that every crack in the wall is a door the cold will try to slip through. In the centre of the room, the hearth is nothing more than a low mound of ash and faint pulsing coals. No bright flames, no cheerful blaze, just a dull red heart beating slowly under a grey skin. Around it, bodies sleep in layered nests of wool, fur and woven blankets. Adults, children, an old grandmother with her back to the wall, a baby wrapped so tightly you can barely see the soft rise and fall of its chest. At first glance it looks peaceful, romantic even. This is how we like to imagine the past. Warm fire, contented family, the golden glow of candlelight softening every hard edge of reality. But look closer, there is nothing sentimental here. Every object in this room has a job, and every job is about the same thing. Surviving nights exactly like this one. On the benches along the walls, there are chests and baskets shoved under sleeping bodies. Inside them, woolen clothes, tools, and sometimes food that needs to stay close to the warmth, but not too close. Hooks in the beams hold smoked meat, dried fish, and bundles of herbs. The smoke-darkened rafters are crowded with silhouettes of food, turned into shadows. Each shape hanging from the roof represents hours of work in autumn, cutting, salting, hanging, checking. The air is thick with the smell of old smoke, animal fat, wool and people who have lived indoors with their animals for months. It's heavy, but it's not accidental. This smoke is insulation. It clings to the thatch, fills gaps, pushes insects and mould back a little further. It seasons the wood, it seasons the food, it seasons the people. You can almost hear the silence thinking. The only sounds are the faint whistling crack of the wind at the door, the occasional snort of a sleeping animal behind the wooden partition where the cows and sheep are kept, and the quiet shifting of someone turning over in their sleep. The coals in the hearth make a soft, intermittent ticking, like a slow clock counting down the hours until dawn. In your world, when you lie awake at night, the quiet is never truly quiet. Somewhere, machines hum, a refrigerator in the kitchen, a boiler in the closet, a hidden web of electricity humming under the floor, ready to leap into action if the temperature drops. Heat is automatic, a utility. You notice it only when it fails. Here, nothing is automatic. Every degree of warmth has been fought for, cut down as firewood in the autumn storms, dried under eaves, carried inside and burned with ruthless calculation. Too much wood now, and you will be cold in late winter. Too little, and someone will not wake up. Tonight, the calculation has been made. The fire is allowed to die. Wood is not wasted on the hours when everyone is asleep, when bodies generate what little heat they can under the blankets. It's a risk, but a necessary one. You can picture the moment just a short time ago, before everyone lay down. Someone, maybe the father, maybe the mother, leaned over the hearth, studied the flames, and decided. No more logs, just let it burn down. They raked the coals together, maybe covered them with a little ash to keep them alive until morning. The light faded from orange to red, from red to a deep breathing glow. One by one, the fire's last tongues of flame withdrew, like soldiers pulling back from the front line. Now, the house is a fortress, with its main torch extinguished. Yet no one panics, no one leaps up to stoke the embers. For them, this is normal. The battle against the horrible winter nights is never fought with one dramatic fire, but with 1,000 small decisions made months before the first snow. If you lift your eyes from the coals and look at the people sleeping, you start to realize how narrow their margin is. The little girl curled up behind her father's back, using his body as a barrier against the draught from the door. The teenager, with hair in his eyes, clutching a rough wool blanket pulled over his head, breathing his own warmth back into himself. The old woman with a cloth wrapped around her head, neck covered, hands tucked into the sleeves of her tunic to stop heat from leaking from her fingers. But that is only half the story. The other half is hidden, not in what they wear, but in what they carry inside them. Because on nights like this, survival is not just about the fire or the walls or the blankets. It is about the fuel burning in their bodies, the invisible heat released from food eaten hours or even days ago. Those dull red coals in the hearth are a reflection of something happening in each person here. Their bodies are quietly burning down their own stored fuel, the barley porridge eaten at dusk, the slice of smoked meat they added to the stew, the cup of warm ale, the sour tang of fermented milk that still lingers in a child's mouth. Every cell is a tiny hearth, and the quality of what went into those cells will decide how they endure the long night. This is where the real war is fought. Not on foreign shores, not in monasteries or coastal villages, but here, in the dark, in the invisible space between hunger and enough. The sagas tell you about the raiders, about men who swung axes and carved dragons into the prows of their ships. They rarely tell you about the woman who spent 3 days grinding barley by hand so that those same men could leave port stronger than they would otherwise be. They praise the chieftain who gives out meat at a feast. They say little about the storekeeper who counted each side of smoked lamb and decided how much could be eaten now and how much had to survive until the end of February. Yet, at this moment it is their work that is being tested. Winter is like an enemy commander, patient and merciless. It attacks not with arrows but with time. It wears down firewood piles, drains cellars, sneaks frost into cracks, encourages mould and rot wherever warmth and dampness meet. It arrives early, stays late, and always asks the same question. Did you prepare enough? If the answer is yes, this night will pass like many others. Cold, uncomfortable, but survivable. People will wake with stiff joints, red noses, and a craving for something hot, but they will wake. If the answer is no, the house will slowly become a trap, people will grow weaker, meals will shrink, the coals in the hearth will still glow, but every time someone looks at them, they will think not about warmth, but about wood, about how much is left, about how much food they have to make last. Imagine one particular figure in the house, not the warrior with the broad shoulders and scars, but the person who knows, down to the handful, what is left in storage. Maybe she keeps the keys to the small chests where the best food is held. Maybe he is the old farmer whose mind is sharper than his back. This person hears the wind and doesn't just think, the storm is fierce, but the grain is holding. The salted meat is enough for 7 more weeks if we are careful. The fish rack survived the last gale. Their thoughts, not the warriors, are the shield standing between this family and disaster. Their enemy isn't a rival clan. It's the empty space at the bottom of a barrel. You and I can open a fridge, stand there with the door open, cold air spilling onto our feet, and complain there is nothing to eat when shelves are lined with food from 3 continents. In this longhouse, nothing to eat is not a joke or an exaggeration. It is an approaching reality that everyone feels as a physical presence long before it actually arrives. But tonight, the air in the house is heavy and calm. There is worry, always, but not panic. Somewhere beneath the floor, in the cool earth, something waits that allows these people to sleep. They trust in what they have stored, in the knowledge and habits passed down through generations who faced winters just as horrible as this one, and survived. Look again at the coals. A faint draught crosses the hearth, and a small ember brightens, throws a brief red glow on the underside of a hanging piece of meat above. For a heartbeat, you see it more clearly, a dark, shrunken shape, once part of a living animal, now transformed into a hard, smoky reserve. It doesn't look like much, but that piece of meat could be the difference between a child going to bed, hungry for the third night in a row, or finally feeling full. Farther back, beyond a half wall, you can just make out the shadowed bulk of a cow. Its breath curls in the cold air, plumes of white rising toward the roof. The animals are their own form of food storage, walking potential, carefully guarded. Killing them too early means meat now, but no milk later. Keeping too many means all the hay disappears before spring. Even the decision of which animals share this room is part of a larger, invisible plan to survive the season. Every choice is a trade. Eat more now, suffer later. Hoard everything, weaken in the present. Somewhere between waste and starvation lies a narrow path, and the people in this longhouse are trying to walk it in the dark. The storm outside has no interest in any of this. It simply continues. Snow piles against the door, squeezes into the gap at the threshold as a fine white dust. The temperature drops another degree, then another. The turf roof creaks, ice thickens on the inside of the window slits, turning them into opaque grey. Inside, the heat stored in human bodies slowly leaks into the air. Blankets trap some of it. The rough wool tunics and fur cloaks hold on to a little more, but nothing stops the process completely. By dawn, the air will be raw, breath will be visible when people sit up. Fingertips and toes will sting as the blood wakes up and rushes back into them. This is why what they ate matters, not in the way we usually talk about food today, counting vitamins and macronutrients, debating superfoods. Here, food is not about trends. It's about whether the heart keeps beating at a steady pace or begins to slow. It's about whether a body has enough fat to burn when the porridge pot is thinner than usual. It's about whether a mother can produce milk for her infant through late winter when the stores are low. On those horrible winter nights, comfort food is not a luxury. It barely exists. Nobody stands staring into a pantry, asking themselves what they're in the mood for. Mood doesn't enter into it. The question is much simpler. What can we afford to eat tonight, and what must we save for the darker weeks still to come? You can almost picture, as if superimposed over this sleeping family, the invisible ledger of their food supply. Lines drawn in someone's head. How many sacks of barley? How many barrels of dried fish? How many smoked hams left under the roof? How many chunks of bog butter still hidden in the peat? How many roots sitting quietly in sand in the cellar below? Each item has its own schedule. Certain things must be eaten first, or they will spoil. Others are held back like elite troops, reserved for the most dangerous phase of the campaign. And that is what this winter really is. A campaign. Not a sudden battle, but a slow, grinding war that lasts for months. The enemy is invisible, but its effects are obvious. Cracked hands, weight loss. The way laughter grows rarer as snowstorms grow more frequent. The way adults begin to lie to children, telling them they've already eaten enough, so the little ones won't notice when portions shrink. Yet, again, this night is calm. The family sleeps, the house stands. The coals are low, but not dead. They are trusting something you haven't seen yet, something hidden under your feet, because the first line of defense against this unstoppable season is not the sword, not the shield, not even the fire. It is what lies out of sight under the floorboards, in the cold earth, packed into barrels, pots and sacks. Carefully arranged, constantly monitored, protected as fiercely as any treasure hoard. To understand how Vikings really survived those horrible winter nights, we can't stay here at the level of blankets and smoke. We have to go where their hope is buried. To answer that, we have to go beneath the floorboards, where the first line of defense against winter is hiding. The floor of the longhouse is not just a floor, it's a lid. Beneath the packed earth, the straw, the scattered bits of bone and ash, there is another world, colder, darker, quieter. The true heart of this household is not the fire you saw in the last chapter, but the cold that waits below it. To understand how Vikings really survived those horrible winter nights, we have to go down. Imagine someone in the house stirring before dawn. The fire is still almost dead, just a faint red glow. The air bites the inside of their nose when they inhale. Everyone else is wrapped in sleep and blankets. They move slowly, feeling with their bare feet for the familiar unevenness in the floor. There, near the hearthstones, the ground changes sound when you step, from dull thud to a hollow note. A hand finds a wooden ring half buried in the dirt. The ring lifts, and with it a heavy wooden hatch groans as it swings open. A wave of air wells up from below. It is cold, much colder than the room, and it smells like earth and stone, cabbage leaves and damp clay. A faint sour tang of fermentation. The ghost of summer roots, now resting in darkness. This is not just a hole, it is a plan. The cellar dug under the hearth, or in the coolest, least sun-touched corner of the longhouse, is one of the most important inventions in this world. Long before anyone thought of compressors or refrigerant gases or humming white boxes in kitchens, people learned that the earth itself could be turned into a protective shell around their food. The deeper you go, the more constant the temperature becomes. The wild swings of weather up top, day thaw, night freeze, sudden storm, are smoothed out by soil and stone. Down here, the world moves more slowly. You can almost feel it as your imagination follows that first step onto the ladder, or rough-cut notches in a pole leading down. Each rung drops you out of the shouting world of storms and into a quiet one. Up there, the wind screams and claws at the roof. Down here, it can be the same night or a completely different one. The air doesn't care. A low, sloped ceiling looms close overhead. The cellar doesn't need to be high, it just needs to be cold. Water seeps slowly through stone in some places. In others, it stays completely dry because someone took the time to line it with planks or clay. Concerns that seem modern, humidity, ventilation, shelf life, are all being managed down here without a single digital thermometer. Look along the walls. There are shelves, planks resting on stones, or even just niches cut into the dirt. Clay pots rest there, heavy and sealed with wax or leather. Wooden barrels squat in corners, their sides swollen with whatever they hold. Baskets filled with something lumpy are tucked into the coolest spots. Every container, every placement is a decision. Not all foods deserve the same protection. The Viking who designed this storage space is playing favourites, and for good reason. The most vulnerable things, the ones that spoil fast, the ones that are hard to replace, are pressed deepest into the coldest corners. These are the fragile treasures, certain dairy products, carefully fermented, that can turn if mishandled, particular vegetables that must not freeze solid, or they'll turn to mush. Perhaps a jar of rendered fat that must stay cool, or it will soften and go rancid. Closer to the ladder, nearer the slightly warmer air and the draught from above, are sturdier things. Dried roots that can take more abuse, baskets of nuts that can shrug off fluctuating temperatures, salted goods sealed so thoroughly that bacteria barely stand a chance, no matter where they sit. Even in this small underground room, there is a hierarchy, not of people but of vulnerability. The coldest corner is like a throne. Only the most delicate foods sit there. Think about how different that is from the way many of us live. We stuff things into cupboards based on convenience, habit, or whatever space is closest to where we happen to be standing. Here, convenience is a luxury no one can afford. Every extra step, every awkward reach into a deeper corner, is a price willingly paid for a few more weeks of safety. The cellar itself is part of a larger machine, the longhouse as a whole. Up above, heat rises, smoke curls into the rafters, warming and drying whatever hangs there. Down below, cold sinks and settles. The Vikings are using the basic laws of physics, like tools. even if they never gave them names. The hearth, set almost in the middle of the building, is like the sun in a tiny private universe. It radiates heat outward. Close to it, the floor is warm. Move away and the temperature drops. Drop down beneath it and it drops further still. Some cellars are directly under the hearth, so the ground above stays dry and the temperature steady. Others are dug where no sun comes through roof slits, and the cold from outside can creep in without freezing everything solid. Nothing about this is accidental. Someone spent days with a shovel, a pick and bare hands, carving this hollow into the earth. Every basket carried into it, every jar carefully set down, is a response to one simple, relentless question. How do we slow down time? Because that's what this really is. Underground, the Vikings are not storing food. They are storing days, weeks, chances. They are trying to trap the generous sun of summer and the thick green of pasture and the wealth of harvest into forms that winter cannot break apart easily. Imagine standing at the bottom of the cellar and looking around slowly, letting your eyes adjust to the dim light. Maybe someone has brought down a candle or a small oil lamp. The flame throws a shaky circle of yellow across curved clay and rough wood. You pick out details. In one clay jar, grains of barley or rye wait, dry and hard, ready to be ground into flour. In another, you might find something much stranger to a modern eye. Sour, preserved milk, thick and tangy, that smells sharp but still safe. In the corner, a barrel brims with water and floating berries, faintly red beneath the surface, kept fresh by their own acids and the cold. A basket holds root vegetables nestled in sand or moss, each one spaced so it does not touch its neighbour, guarded against the first spot of rot. There might even be a small, tightly sealed container with something precious. Honey, perhaps, or a lump of butter that didn't make the trip to the bog, and instead is entrusted to this cool darkness. Each item is a story about a past day of work. A day of milking, a day of berry picking, a day of harvesting, a day of churning or boiling or cutting. And above your head, directly through the ceiling, people sleep. They trust that this quiet, hidden room will keep doing its job whether they are awake or not. They might dream of green fields or salted meat, but their bodies rest because they know that, beneath them, the earth is cradling tomorrow's meals. The longhouse as a whole can now be seen in a cross-section in your mind. At the top, smoke and heat gather in the rafters, wrapping themselves around hanging meat and fish. In the middle, people and animals share space, their bodies trading heat and breath. At the bottom, in the cold, the food that cannot stand smoke or warmth sleeps in Earth's arms. Heat up, cold down, living bodies in the middle, food in every layer. It is more than a home. It is a vertical survival apparatus, tuned, tested and improved over generations. If you could walk through a Viking settlement in winter and look into the ground, you would see these underground fortresses of food scattered everywhere, beneath the snow. Pits, root cellars, small Zvel spaces under hearths, storage holes lined with stone or wood. Some might be outside the house, covered with turf, invisible to anyone who doesn't know exactly where to step. Others are tucked into outbuildings or corners where the sun never hits. The word Zvel for that special cool space under the hearth captures something deeply practical and quietly sacred. This is not a pantry you show off. This is not a feast table piled high for guests to admire. This is the stomach of the house, the place where food rests in darkness until it is needed. Think about how much trust is placed here. If someone miscalculates, digs too shallow, chooses a damp spot, fails to notice a leak, mould blooms quietly in the dark. Root vegetables soften and collapse. Grain grows fur or insects. A family might not know the full scale of the disaster until the storm outside is at its worst, and they lift the hatch to find that the earth they thought was protecting them has betrayed them instead. So they pay attention. They monitor. Someone in the house regularly goes down, crouches in the cold, lifts lids, runs fingers over stored roots, sniffs the air for the first hint of sourness that doesn't belong. They move things, turn sacks, scrap the odd suspicious item before it infects the rest. This routine, this quiet, obsessive tending, is as important to survival as sharpening an axe or patching a sail. You can't see it in sagas of raids, but it is happening in the background of every heroic story. The men who leave in spring for a long voyage can do so because in winter, someone went down that ladder again and again, making sure nothing down here was quietly dying. What gets the safest, darkest, coldest place underground says a lot about what this community values and fears losing. And here's where your assumptions might start to wobble. We like to imagine Vikings as meat-obsessed, always thinking about slabs of roasted animals. But when you stand in this cellar and look around, you realise something. A great deal of what is treasured here isn't meat at all. Grain, protected from moisture, might get pride of place. Without it, porridge pots will empty and bread will vanish. Certain roots and cabbages, if they rot, won't be replaced until next year's harvest. Fermented, carefully managed milk products represent high-quality protein that cannot be improvised if ruined. Meat, especially when already dried or salted, can sometimes take a little more heat or a slightly less perfect position and still be safe. In other words, the Viking idea of precious is not always what you expect. A barrel of good grain, sitting on a raised platform in a dry corner, might be guarded more closely than a pile of weapons. A small pot of starter culture for a favourite fermented dairy might be considered more irreplaceable than an extra cloak. This is architecture and logistics as theology of survival. Walls and roofs and pits and shelf heights are all expressions of a worldview where the gods might control storms, but humans are expected to control their storage. The people in this society cannot command the wind to stop or the snow to melt. They can, however, command where cold and heat flow inside their own domain. Up above, someone eventually wakes fully. They stretch, shiver, and pad barefoot across the rough floor. Their first thought is not about plunder, not about honour, not even about the distant rumour of trade ships. It's about breakfast. They shuffle to the hatch, open it, let the cold breath roll out from below, and reach down into their private underworld. Maybe they lift a basket with a few turnips still firm and heavy. Maybe they reach for a jar of barley, measuring by sound and weight whether there is enough left to cook today as generously as they did yesterday. Without saying it, they are performing a ritual, checking the strength of their fortress. Every time they descend, they're asking a question. How much time do we still have stored here? It is easy to romanticize the Viking world as one of bold spontaneity, sudden raids, wild feasts, but the deeper you go into the earth, the more you start to see that the real strength of these people lies in their willingness to build slow, patient systems. To dig, to plan, to hide food where the light cannot reach. To accept that survival is not a one-time act of courage, but thousands of small, repetitive tasks carried out in spaces no one sings songs about. The longhouse, with its smoky rafters and warm central hearth, makes for a beautiful painting. The cellar beneath it, damp and cramped and full of jars, does not. But if you had to choose which of these two spaces decides whether this family sees spring, you would pick the cellar, every time. And this is where the first real shock comes for many people when they step, even in imagination, into a Viking winter. They expect glory up above, not engineering down below. They picture overflowing roasting tables, not careful stacks of roots in sand. But what exactly fills those jars and barrels? If you think it's mostly meat, you're about to be disappointed and a little shocked. If you could lift the roof off this longhouse on a winter morning and look down at the table, you might be disappointed. No roasted boar laid out like in television dramas. No overflowing platters of meat dripping with fat. No heroic feast worthy of a saga painting. Instead, you'd see something far more modest and far more important. A heavy pot, a wooden ladle, steam rising slowly from a thick, beige mass inside. Barley porridge. Again, this is the harsh truth about what Vikings really ate to survive those horrible winter nights. Most of their calories didn't come from meat or fish or exotic delicacies. They came from something so ordinary that we barely even notice it on our own plates. Grain. Day after day. Bowl after bowl. Winter after winter. Up to 70, 80, even 90% of what kept a Viking body moving through the dark months was cereal-based. Barley, rye, oats. Not glamorous, not worthy of a saga by itself, but absolutely essential. Watch the morning unfold. The storm outside has calmed a little. The wind is still there, but the worst of its rage has burned out. Inside, the coals have been coaxed back to life. A small flame licks up, fed by slender sticks before broader logs are added. Light grows, chasing the shadows back into the corners. Someone, often one of the women of the house, sometimes an older child, moves with practiced motions. She fills a pot with water, maybe breaks in a piece of yesterday's bread to thicken it, then goes to fetch the real foundation of the meal. Grain. The cellar hatch opens for a moment, that now familiar sigh of cold air spilling into the room. A scoop is plunged into a sack. You can almost hear the sound of dry kernels rattling against wood. Not too much, never too much. Every scoop is measured against weeks still ahead. A handful more might make today's porridge richer, but it could mean thinner meals in the hunger gap before spring. Back at the hearth, the grain meets the water. The pot is hung above the growing fire. Slowly, as the room wakes up around it, a smell fills the air. Warm, simple, ancient. Not the intoxicating scent of roast meat, but the steady, almost sweet smell of cereal, thickening over heat. This is grauta, thick barley porridge, the most common dish in this world. It is not a treat, it is the baseline. But look a little further back in time, before this moment. This bowl of porridge did not begin its life when the pot went on the fire. It started days, weeks, months ago, in fields where barley grew short and tough under a hard northern sun. It continued through harvest, when each stalk was cut, bundled, dried. Then came threshing, winnowing, drying again, and finally storage. And then every single day there is the grind. Imagine kneeling on the floor in a corner of the longhouse where the light is strongest. In front of you rests a pair of stones, a heavy, flat one below, and a round one above that you can turn with your hands. This is the hand mill, the quern. Its surface is dusted with flour. Grain goes in a small hole at the top. You grip the handle and begin to push. The stone is not light, it never has been. Its weight settles into your shoulders, your elbows, your wrists, around and around. Your muscles are finding a rhythm. The sound it makes is its own kind of heartbeat, a grinding, scraping whisper that fills the background of every day. Children grow up with this sound in their ears. It is the sound of tomorrow's bread, of next week's porridge. As you turn the stone, whole grains vanish under it and reappear at the edges as something new. Coarse flour, hot from friction, dusting your hands. You stop occasionally to scrape it together, to feel its texture. Too coarse, and the bread will be heavy as stone. Too fine, and you waste energy grinding more than you need. Somewhere in between lies the balance, learned by touch, not by recipe. Hour after hour, this work falls mostly to women and older girls, though whoever is free may help. On a bad day, your shoulders ache, your hands blister. On a worse day, you're doing it while already hungry. You are literally grinding your own fuel with muscles that are running low. But you keep going because you know something the sagas rarely bother to mention. Without this monotonous, invisible labour, no one fights, no one trades, no one sails. The men who stride into history with axes and shields do so on a foundation of 1,000 such circles of stone. By the time the flour is used, that moment of grinding is almost forgotten. No one at the table will comment on the exact way the barley was milled. They will just taste enough or thin or good tonight. But down at the grinding stone, someone is doing calorie math without numbers. How much grain can be spared? How hungry are we? How deep into winter are we already? When the porridge is finally ready, It doesn't arrive in neat individual servings. A large wooden bowl might be set in the middle of the table, and spoons or pieces of bread become tools to claim a share. In poorer households, there might not even be spoons for everyone. People eat in order, children first, then adults, then anyone whose stomach is expected to be toughest. Watch how people react when the pot arrives. No one gasps in awe, no one cheers. There is no dramatic reveal. This is what they expected. In some ways, that's the most revealing part. The fact that porridge is normal means that the feast, meat, extra fat, special treats, is the exception. Each bowl of grouter is a calculated dose of energy. Not an indulgence, not a comfort food chosen on a whim. A dose. Enough to work, to endure the cold walk outside, to repair tools, to tend animals. Enough to keep children growing slowly instead of shrinking. Enough to keep adults from becoming too thin before the end of winter. You could think of this porridge like wood piled by the door. You don't burn everything in one glorious bonfire for warmth and spectacle. You feed it to the fire bit by bit, just enough to hold the line against the cold. In the same way, you don't dump all your grain into thick, luxurious meals in early winter. You stretch it, day after day, thin, enough to last, thick enough to live. When bread appears, it bears the same logic written into its crust. Don't picture a soft, tall loaf like from a modern bakery. Picture flat cakes, roughly shaped, baked on hot stones or in simple pans over or beside the fire. They are dense. Sometimes they are dark from rye or from being baked close to the flame. You could use one as a plate, and sometimes people do. This bread isn't meant to charm you. It is meant to fill you. You eat a piece and feel it sit in your stomach, solid and calm, like an anchor. That heaviness is part of its job. Heavy bread means a quieter stomach for longer. Heavy bread hangs onto its moisture and keeps mold away better than soft fluff ever could. A bite might surprise you with something extra, a few whole grains that escaped full grinding, a stray seed. On good days, a hint of dried berry or a smear of butter. On most days, it is just bread. Yet in this world, just bread is a miracle of logistics. It is the end point of a chain of planning that began long before the first frost. When we talk about wealth in Viking culture, our imaginations jump to silver arm rings, ornate weapons, jewels taken in raids. Those things did matter. They signalled status, connections, victories. But if you could ask a farmer in late winter which treasure mattered most, you might get a different answer. Wealth is the feeling of putting your hand into a grain sack and still feeling plenty under your fingers. Wealth is looking at the storage bins in the loft or the cellar and knowing that your children will not see the bottom of them before green returns to the fields. Wealth is being able to serve porridge a little thicker, bread slices a little larger, without that familiar fear tugging at the back of your mind. A silver brooch won't keep you alive when the wind gnaws at the cracks in the wall. A well-filled grain bin will. Think again about that grinding woman at the quern. She may own no jewellery, no exquisite dress, but she is feeding the entire household something more precious than any ornament: time. Every handful of flour she produces is another day they can endure. Her work will never be carved into stone as a saga hero's is. Yet, without her, there would be no one left to tell any story. In the harsh arithmetic of winter, grain is both food and currency, both daily bread and long-term investment. People lend it, people owe it, people remember who had enough to spare and who didn't. Wars might be fought over land and honour, but peace is lived over porridge pots and breadboards. And here is the part that might feel almost disappointing from a modern perspective. A lot of Viking meals in winter were repetitive, the same core ingredients, recombined and stretched. Porridge in the morning, bread and perhaps a thin soup at midday, porridge with something extra at night, if you're fortunate. To you, that might sound boring. To them, boring meant stability. Variety often meant desperation, throwing unusual foods into the pot because the usual ones had run out. So when you see yet another wooden bowl of barley grouter set on the table, don't imagine boredom. Imagine relief. Imagine bodies that will have enough fuel for one more day of cutting wood, mending tools, carrying water, spinning wool, watching the horizon for storms. Of course, grain alone can't carry a body through frozen months. It fills, it warms, it keeps people standing, but it can't do everything. Somewhere in the shadows of the cellar sits a strange, thick white substance the Vikings quietly treated like treasure. Somewhere in the cellar, in the darkest corner, sits something that looks almost dull at first glance. No dramatic shape like a hanging ham, no strange smell like fermented fish, no bright colour like berries in water. Just a pale, thick mass in a clay pot, or a solid yellowish block wrapped in bark or cloth. But in this world, that quiet lump might be the closest thing they have to a superfood. Milk on its own is a fragile miracle. It comes warm from the udder, full of fat, protein, sugar and water. It is perfect for a calf, and dangerously short-lived for everyone else. Leave it in a wooden pail on a summer day, and by nightfall it will already be changing, sliding out of the narrow window between fresh and rotten. The Vikings understood this window well. They learned very quickly that if you wanted milk to help you survive winter, you couldn't leave it as milk. You had to transform it, break it down to rebuild it. Invite good microbes in so the bad ones never get a chance. Imagine a summer day, months before the horrible winter nights you've been walking through. The longhouse doors are open, light pours in, flies circle lazily. Outside, the world is green. The animals are fat on grass. Cows swish their tails, heavy udders full. This is the season when the Vikings are already thinking about the cold. Buckets of milk come in, heavy and sloshing. Women and older children carry them to a corner where the air is cooler and the process begins. Sometimes a bit of yesterday's sour milk is added as a starter. Sometimes the natural bacteria in the environment does the work. Either way, a slow transformation begins. At first, nothing much seems to happen. The milk just sits, but then slowly it thickens. The smooth liquid begins to separate. Tangy scents rise. Where once there was only one substance, now there are two. A thicker, curd-like mass and a thin, yellowish liquid. Curd and whey. This is where the line between food and science starts to blur. Without charts or chemical equations, they are running a controlled experiment. They are changing the acidity of the milk, shifting the environment inside the bucket so that certain microbes flourish and others die. They might not know the words pH or lactic acid, but they know the smell of success and the sour reek of failure. Thick part, the curd is scooped up into cloths, bags made of tightly woven fabric, or even animal stomachs cleaned and reused. These bags are hung from beams, posts, or hooks in the roof, where air can circulate and gravity can do the slow, patient work of drawing out more liquid. You can picture them, pale, heavy sacks swaying slightly in the smoky air, dripping whey into bowls below. The drops fall with tiny plinks. Children learn very quickly not to stand up underneath unless they want a cold splash. Hours pass. The sacks grow lighter and firmer. Someone comes to check, opens one slightly, presses a thumb into the soft white mass inside. Not yet. Or maybe, yes, this is right, firm enough to hold its shape. Soft enough to scoop. What comes out of those bags is not exactly the Skyr you'd buy in a supermarket today, but it is its ancestor. Thick, tangy, high in protein, low in water. It is concentrated milk. The water that would have rotted first is mostly gone. What remains is dense nutrition. This thick, spoonable substance can be eaten fresh, mixed with berries, drizzled with a little honey if you're lucky. But its real value lies in its staying power. Kept in a cool cellar, protected from heat and contamination, it will last far longer than the milk it came from ever could. While snow piles against the walls in winter, the memory of summer grass lives on in those white clumps. And the leftover liquid, the whey, is not wasted. To modernise, it might look like something you throw away. To Vikings, it is another tool. It is drinkable, sour, refreshing, slightly sharp, a kind of primitive sports drink full of minerals. It can also be used as a preservative. Poured over meat or vegetables, its acidity creating an environment hostile to decay. Nothing is wasted if it can be turned into another defence against time. But if there is one form of dairy that deserves the title, white gold, it is butter. Butter is energy made solid. It is sunlight and grass and summer rain, packed into a block you can hold in your hand. In a place where winter can gnaw at you for half the year, this is power. Butter begins with cream, gathered from the top of settled milk. In some houses, the cream is saved for days in a cool place until there is enough to make the effort worthwhile. Then comes the churning. Imagine a tall wooden churn, heavy with thick cream. A plunger rises and falls inside, driven by hands and arms that will be sore tomorrow. The rhythm is constant. Up, down, twist a little, up, down, again. Children might take a few turns, giggling at the splashes, but the bulk of the work falls to those who can maintain the pace. For a long time, nothing seems to change. The cream just sloshes, thickens, sloshes again. Then suddenly, the sound shifts. The liquid inside begins to clump. The plunger meets resistance, then breaks through it. Globules of fat start to stick together, turning into something new. When the churn lid is lifted, you can see two worlds again. Pale yellow lumps of butter fat and a thinner liquid, buttermilk, left behind. The butter is lifted out, squeezed and kneaded to drive out as much liquid as possible. Salt might be worked in when available, but even in its pure form, butter is already much more stable than cream. Fresh butter is a joy. Spread on bread, it turns a simple meal into something that feels rich, even luxurious. Melted into porridge, it doubles the calories of each spoonful. Added to cooked vegetables, it transforms them from duty into satisfaction. But the Vikings are not making butter just to enjoy it fresh. They are thinking of winter the way a castle designer thinks of siege. Their question is, how do we keep this for months, maybe even years? Some of the answers are straightforward. Butter can be packed tightly into wooden containers, sealed with salt and stored in the coolest part of the cellar. But there is another, stranger method used in some regions that pushes their ingenuity into the realm of pure practical madness. For this, you have to leave the longhouse and walk out into the open land. The ground is softer in certain places, spongy, wet, your boots sink in slightly. This is peat bog country, acidic, waterlogged, low in oxygen, a place where time moves even more slowly than in a cellar. The Vikings looked at these bogs and saw more than just fuel to be cut and dried for fires. They saw a natural preservation chamber. Barrels or bundles of butter, tightly wrapped in bark or skins, are carried out and lowered into carefully chosen spots in the bog. Sometimes they're weighted with stones, sometimes they're marked with subtle signs only the family will recognize. Then they disappear under the surface, into water that is cold, dark, and almost devoid of the oxygen that normally lets microorganisms thrive. It is a deeply odd thought, even now, burying your food in a swamp and trusting that it will come out better, not worse. But bogs are strange places. The same conditions that can preserve a body or a piece of wood for centuries can also cradle butter safely for years. Down there, hidden from light and air, the butter ages. It may pick up a strong, unique flavour. By the time it is retrieved, months or even seasons later, it may taste sharper, more pungent than fresh butter. But it is still edible, still dense with calories, still capable of turning thin porridge into something that feels like luxury. When you imagine someone trudging out into the cold, ice crusting on the edge of the bog, cutting into the peat and lifting out a buried bundle, you are watching a kind of time travel. They are reaching back into summer for help. All of this, curdling, hanging, pressing, churning, burying, is science by hand and habit. No one is writing treatises on lactic acid bacteria. No one is measuring temperatures numerically. Yet every choice they make is an experiment repeated enough times to become tradition. They learn that certain cool corners are better for storing Skyr-like curds than others. They discover that butter kept in one type of container lasts longer than in another. They notice that whey poured over meat changes how long it stays safe. If something spoils, they remember. If something keeps, they repeat. Over generations, this becomes a body of knowledge as solid as any written text. Remember that winter night in the longhouse, when we talked about bodies acting like small hearths? Dairy is some of the richest fuel those hearths will ever burn. A spoonful of thick fermented milk, a slice of butter melting on hot bread, a cup of whey after work. These are not just flavours, they are strategies. Think of a child in late winter, thinner than in autumn, cheeks hollowed a little by months of rationing. In a bowl of porridge, a small knob of butter disappears as it melts, turning the surface glossy. The child dips a spoon in. Each mouthful now carries more than grain. It carries fat that will keep their body going through yet another freezing walk to fetch water, another hour helping with chores. Or imagine a farmer heading out into bitter wind, shoulders braced, knowing he must check on animals in a distant shed. Before he goes, he eats a chunk of dried bread and smears it with butter. It is not a feast, it is a battery. Calories he will slowly discharge as he trudges through snow. This is why dairy, especially preserved dairy, is treated with such respect. It is a way of saving the bounty of the short northern summers, when grass is high and cows are heavy with milk, then spending it carefully under grey winter skies when the pastures are nothing but frozen memory. Milk in its fresh form is like a coin that loses value almost as soon as it lands in your hand. Cheese, curds, aged dairy, bog butter, these are investments locked away in secret vaults underground and underwater. If you could line up all these transformed forms of dairy on a table, a bowl of thick, Skyr-like curds, a jug of whey, a brick of butter dug from a bog, a small crumbly piece of long-kept cheese, you would see more than food. You would see a map of human adaptation. Every texture and smell and method would tell you, we learned how to turn something fleeting into something lasting. And yet even this white gold is only one piece of the arsenal. However rich, however carefully protected, dairy alone can't dominate the menu every day in every place. There are coasts and islands where cows are fewer or summers shorter. There are fjords and inlets where another resource arrives reliably each year. Not on hooves, but in cold, glittering schools beneath the waves. Because in some places, the true backbone of survival didn't walk on land at all. It swam in from the open sea and then turned into something hard as a club. Far to the north, where the mountains rise straight out of the sea and winter feels less like a season and more like a permanent occupation, the Vikings found a way to turn the ocean itself into a storage room. Here, the land is stingy, the soil is thin, the fields small, the wind relentless. But the sea is generous, if you know when to ask. Every year, at roughly the same time, something begins to move in the dark water. Vast schools of cod rise from the deep and press in toward the coast, toward the narrow sounds and fjords of places like Lofoten. It is as if the ocean is exhaling life toward the shore. Picture a grey morning in late winter. The sun barely clears the tops of snow-covered peaks. The air is so cold it feels like it has teeth. Wooden boats push away from the rocky beach, their hulls creaking, their crews wrapped in woolen fur, fingers already stiff before the first oar stroke. Out on the water, the world is reduced to essentials. The heave of the boat, the hiss of wind, the cry of gulls. Beneath the surface, unseen, a mass of fish moves like a slow living river. Lines go down, baited hooks dropping into darkness. There is a pause, a held breath, then a jerk, sudden and solid. One by one, cod came up. Long, heavy bodies, silver grey with white bellies, eyes bulging from the pressure change, gills flaring. Men haul them over the gunwale with practiced motions, clubbing them, unhooking them, sending them to the bottom of the boat where they pile up in a slick, cold heap. The work is fast, efficient, almost frantic. The window is narrow. Storms can slam shut this opportunity with no warning. When the cod are running, you fill the boat. You load the sea's generosity as deep as wood and balance will allow, because you are not just fishing for tonight's meal. You are fishing for months of survival. Back on shore, the harvest doesn't rest. While breath still curls in the air and hands still ache from the oars, knives come out. Fish are split open from throat to tail, guts pulled free in one practiced sweep. Heads and entrails are discarded or used in other ways. The bodies are cleaned in the same cold water that birthed them, then prepared for their real transformation. They are not being salted. Salt is precious, expensive, a luxury. Here, the Vikings don't need it. They have something better, climate. The cod are tied in pairs by their tails, back to back, like strange, pale wings. These pairs are then carried to great wooden frames that line the shore, huge constructions of poles and crossbeams, rising like skeletal forests out of the rocky ground. In Norwegian, they're called hjell, drying racks. To an outsider, they might look like scaffoldings waiting for a building that never arrives. To the people who live here, they are more important than any tower. One by one, pairs of fish are hooked over the beams. The racks stretch into the distance, row after row, until the coastline looks like it has grown a new eerie kind of forest. Except the leaves are thousands of stiff, silent bodies swaying gently in the wind. This is where the magic happens. Not magic in the sense of spells or charms, but in the sense that something ordinary is about to become something almost supernatural. The air here is cold, nearly always just above freezing. The wind seldom sleeps. It races down from the mountains, sweeps in from the sea, slides between the hanging fish. The low northern sun, when it appears, is weak but persistent. In many climates, hanging meat in the open would be an invitation to rot. Bacteria would feast, insects would swarm, the fish would sag and decay, stinking long before they dried. But here, in this particular pocket of earth and sky, things are different. The cold stuns most bacteria. The dryness and wind constantly draw moisture away. There are few insects in these temperatures, and those that exist have little power against the combination of salt water, cold and movement. Slowly, over weeks and months, the water is pulled out of the fish. At first they are still flexible. Then they stiffen, flesh hardens, the weight drops and drops again. By the time the process is finished, each piece of cod has lost up to 80% of its weight. What's left is something uncanny, light, hard and dry as a piece of wood. If you pick it up, it feels more like a tool than a food. You can rap it against a beam and hear a sharp, ringing knock. In a pinch, you could actually use it as a club. This is stockfish, boards of protein that refuse to rot. Take one in your hands in your imagination. It is pale, almost white with a hint of yellow, its surface rough and fibrous. It smells of sea and age, a ghost of the fresh fish it once was. It is nearly weightless compared to its original form, yet all the protein, most of the nutrients, are still there. The water, the part most vulnerable to rot, has been driven out. You are holding frozen time, because in a very real sense, that is what stockfish is. It is a moment in late winter, when the cod run was at its peak, when boats were heavy, when fish were so plentiful that you could layer them on racks until the coastline looked like a forest of flesh, captured and preserved for years. Once dried, stockfish can last almost indefinitely if kept dry and safe from pests. Not just months, years. Long after the fishermen who caught a particular haul have forgotten that day, a piece of that catch might still be hanging in a storeroom, waiting to be revived. Imagine a storage loft or a shed near a Viking farm. Along one wall, bundles of stockfish are stacked or hung, long, stiff pieces bound together with rope. They barely take up any space compared to the fresh fish they once were. You could carry the protein equivalent of an entire boatload on your shoulder. That is the true power of this food. It is not just that it keeps, it is that it keeps while becoming lighter, easier to move, easier to store. In a world where everything must be carried on backs, on sleds, on boats, weight is almost as important as calories. Think of a ship being prepared for a sea journey. The crew needs food, lots of it. They need something that won't spoil in damp, shifting temperatures, something that won't bulge barrels or leak. Grain is good, but it takes up space and needs cooking. Fresh meat is a disaster waiting to happen unless eaten quickly. Stockfish, though? You can pack it tight along the sides of a ship. You can wedge it under benches. You can lash bundles of it in the hold. It doesn't leak. It doesn't rot in ordinary conditions. It doesn't require salt water to be kept away from it, because it has already been thoroughly baptized by the sea and wind. On the voyage, when men grow hungry and the days blur together, someone takes out a board. It is not eaten as is. That would break your teeth and give you little joy. Instead, the process goes in reverse, slowly. The stockfish is soaked in water for hours or days, depending on how hard and old it is. It softens, swells slightly, and remembers what it was. Then it is beaten with a hammer or mallet to break up the fibres, turning a plank back into something like flesh. Boil it, stew it, cook it with a bit of whatever fat is available, and suddenly that impossibly dry board becomes a fragrant steaming dish. Serve it with bread or with a lump of butter if you are fortunate, and it becomes the kind of meal that pulls you back from the edge of exhaustion. Now imagine this scenario, not just for a few men, but for crew after crew, voyage after voyage, to Greenland, to Iceland, maybe even beyond toward the cold shores of North America. The ability to carry high-quality protein across vast distances without it spoiling is not just a dietary trick, it is a strategic advantage. In this way, the racks on the northern coasts, the gel loaded with hanging fish, are not just local tools. They are part of the machinery that makes Viking expansion possible. A longship's reach is determined not only by wind and wood, but by how far its food supply can stretch without collapsing into rot. Think of it another way. If grain is the daily bread of the north, stockfish is its hardtack of the sea. Tough, plain, reliable, always there when you need it. It doesn't get sagas written about it, but it quietly appears in the background of countless journeys, countless winters, countless lean years, when the land failed, but the racks did not. Walk again along the coastline, under those hanging fish. The sound of gulls is constant, greedy eyes watching for any scrap that falls. The smell is strong, not exactly pleasant, but not yet the reek of decay. Men and women move along the rows, checking, adjusting, making sure that none of the fish has fallen into a state between drying and rotting. They know from experience what the right flexibility feels like when they bend a piece, what the right sound is when they tap it. A sudden storm can undo months of work. A warm spell can turn edges soft, so they watch the sky as much as they watch the racks. The work of preservation is never just set it and forget it. It is a relationship with the weather, a partnership with wind and cold. When the drying season ends, the coastline changes again. The racks are empty. The forest of fish vanishes, leaving bare beams behind. The work moves indoors, underground, into storerooms where the boards of protein are stacked away like planks. There, in the dark, they wait without complaint. In the heart of winter, when a family in a distant inland farm sits around a pot and dreams of something more than grain, one of those boards might be pulled from its rest. In a town where trade routes converge, stockfish might be swapped for cloth, for metal, for all sorts of goods coming from hundreds of miles away. In some ways, it has become a kind of currency, a storable, standardized, highly valued unit of nourishment. Imagine the difference between a cellar lined only with sacks of grain and a cellar where, alongside the grain, bundles of stockfish hang. The second family is more secure. They can vary their meals. They can face a bad harvest of barley with less terror. They can send a son or daughter on a journey with food that will still be edible months later. Think of the psychological weight too. In late winter, when the baskets of roots run low and the bread is thinner than ever, being able to pull down a board of dried fish and turn it into stew is not just a physical comfort. It is a reminder that past effort paid off, that the world can still give, even when outside everything is white and dead. Stockfish is harsh. It is not tender. It is not the stuff of feasts. It is the food of stubborn persistence, of we will outlast this. It is what you eat when you are more interested in seeing another summer than in enjoying this evening's meal. By now, you've seen the pattern. Grain turned into porridge and hard bread. Milk turned into curds and butter, sometimes buried in bogs like fatty treasure. Fish turned into boards of almost immortal protein. Again and again, the Vikings are doing the same thing, taking something soft, wet and fleeting, and turning it into something dry, dense and enduring. And yet even stockfish and bog butter weren't enough. The Vikings still needed meat, real red meat, and to keep it through months, when nothing outside stayed alive, they turned their homes into giant smoke chambers. If you stand in the middle of a Viking longhouse and tilt your head back, you are not just looking at a roof, you are looking at a pantry, a slow, smoky factory, a kind of upside-down forest of food. The air above your head is thick and blue, never fully clear. The fire at the centre of the room smoulders and flares, sending a constant stream of smoke upward. It rolls along the beams, curls around every surface, and eventually squeezes out through slits or holes in the roof. The longhouse never gets truly bright inside because of it. But that darkness, that murky veil, is part of a plan. In that murk, shapes hang from rafters, the curved outline of lamb legs, ribs, strings of sausages, strips of meat stiffening into something almost black. At a glance, they might look like shadows or strange dangling roots. Then a shift of light from the fire catches on a greasy edge, and you realise you're looking at dinner on delay. To understand how this meat ended up overhead, instead of rotting on the ground, you have to go back to autumn. The year is tipping, the days are shrinking. Grass that was lush a month ago is fading, dying back into the soil. Hay lies in stacks where people have cut and dried as much as they can. The animals are brought closer, counted, studied. There is a hard truth everyone here knows. You cannot take every animal into winter. The hay will not last. The pasture once buried under snow will feed no one. If you try to keep too many mouths alive, all will weaken, and you may lose everything. So there comes a day, everyone can feel it approaching, when decisions have to be made. Men and women stand together in the yard, breath white in the crisp air. They look at the herd, cows, sheep, goats, sometimes pigs. They see more than animals. They see future milk, wool, traction, and yes, meat. They also see hay stacked in barns and know its limits. This one stays, someone says, pointing to a strong cow, a good milker. That one goes, they say of an older animal, whose best years are behind it. The same with sheep. The breeding ewes, the strongest rams are spared. Others, thinner, less essential, are marked. Pigs, often raised specifically with meat in mind, stand snuffling at the edge of their own fate. It is not a pleasant day. There is no way to romanticize it. The animals that will die are animals people have tended, watched, perhaps even grown fond of. But sentiment cannot be allowed to rule here. Winter does not negotiate with feelings. It only responds to preparation. Once the decisions are made, the work begins. Knives are sharpened, fires are built, not for warmth, but for boiling water, for scorching hair, for cleaning tools. The yard becomes an abattoir. One by one, animals are led away. A quick cut, a gush of blood steaming in the cold, a body that goes limp. Skins are removed, heads taken, offal sorted through with sharp, practical eyes. Nothing truly useful is wasted. Blood can become sausage. Organs, some of the most nutrient-dense parts, are eaten quickly while they're fresh and at their best. Bones will serve for soup, tools, or even simple toys. Fat is rendered down into tallow for cooking and lamps. The first meat of slaughter time is a strange mix of tragedy and relief. Fresh cuts sizzle over open flames. People eat deeply, almost drunkenly, in abundance, knowing that this glut is temporary, a sharp spike of richness before the long flat months of careful rationing. There is talk, noise, perhaps even laughter, but under it all is a thread of awareness. This feast is the front end of a long line of calculations, because most of this meat is not meant for now, it is meant for later. As soon as the first rush of fresh eating has passed, the serious work of preservation begins. Some of the prime cuts are rubbed with salt if there is enough to spare. Salt draws out moisture, making the environment less friendly for the bacteria that cause rot. Meat may be packed into barrels, layered with crystals of white. each layer slowly surrendering its water into a briny bath. But salt, like everything else, has limits. It is expensive and, in many inland places, scarce. You cannot count on it to save all your meat, so you turn to something you have in abundance: smoke. Inside the longhouse, the central fire never truly goes out in winter. It is the beating heart of the room. It warms bodies, cooks meals, and fills the air with a constant fog. The very design of the house encourages this. No chimney to send smoke up and away in a neat column, just openings and slits that let the worst of it escape slowly while the rest lingers under the roof. Someone recognizes, perhaps long ago, that meat hung in that smoky zone behaves differently. It dries more slowly, more steadily. It darkens, firms, resists the soft, disgusting slide into decay. Insects avoid it. The smell changes from raw blood to something deeper, more complex, almost sweet. So rafters become racks. In the days after slaughter, the house is transformed into a slow-moving smokehouse. Meat that has been salted, or at least well drained and rubbed with herbs when available, is cut into shapes that will hang. Legs are left whole or halved, ribs are kept in slabs. Thin strips are sliced for faster drying. Sausages are made from minced meat, mixed with fat and spices, stuffed into cleaned intestines and twisted into links. Ladders are leaned against beams. People climb up into the dim, choke-thick air, eyes watering. They loop twine around joints and bones, secure hooks into wooden rafters, arrange each piece so air can touch every surface. It is hot up there, in a strange way. Not the cosy heat of a hearthside, but the prickly, throat-catching warmth of close smoke. From below, you now see the roof area crowded with hanging shapes. The house smells different, stronger, denser. The smoke doesn't just carry the scent of burning wood anymore. It carries the beginning of preserved meat. The heavy, savoury perfume of fat and muscle starting to cure. What is actually happening in that murk is a quiet kind of chemistry. The smoke itself comes from incomplete combustion of wood and whatever else has been tossed into the fire. Peat, brush, bits of bone. It contains a mix of compounds, phenols, aldehydes, acids, that have antimicrobial properties. They drift through the air and cling to the surface of the meat, seeping in slowly. At the same time, the warmth high in the roof is gentle, not enough to cook the meat aggressively, but enough to encourage evaporation. Moisture in the flesh rises to the surface and is carried away into the air. Day after day, week after week, the meat loses water, becoming denser, more concentrated. Insects, which might be eager to lay eggs in fresh meat, are deterred by the smoke and by the dry, developing outer layer. Bacteria that would thrive in a wet, neutral environment struggle here in this smoky, acidic, dehydrated zone. Without anyone naming these forces, the Vikings are manipulating them with practical precision. Time passes. The memory of the slaughter day fades. Snow falls and stays. The animals that survived that culling now live mostly indoors, sharing warmth with the humans. Outside, nothing grows. Inside, above your head, the meat continues its slow transformation. Run your hand in your mind along one of those hanging legs of lamb in February. The surface is tough now, smooth in places, almost leathery. It yields slightly under pressure, but not like fresh flesh. The colour has deepened to a dark, rich brown, nearly black near the exposed ends. If you cut into it, the interior would be firmer than any cooked meat, a cross between ham and jerky, dense with concentrated flavour. The smell when you slice into it is astonishing. The smoke that once made your eyes water now seems captured, tamed, turned into aroma. It's not the gentle scent of modern delicatessen, it's stronger, more elemental. Wood, fat, thyme. The first sliver shaved off. Thin as you can manage, glistens slightly with fat when it warms in your fingers. In the worst weeks of winter, when the porridge pot alone feels like it's not enough, someone climbs the ladder and cuts off just such a sliver. They bring it down like treasure. That shaving of hardened lamb might be chopped into a stew to lend it strength and flavour, or it might be eaten raw in tiny bites, a treat as much for the mouth as for the mind. The same with ribs, long since turned from fresh red to dark smoky planks. A rack might hang for months, each meal taking only what's needed, leaving the rest for another day. Sausages, once plump and moist, have dried into something more intense. Their skins wrinkled, their insides firm. Every cut is measured. Every cut is a decision. How much can we take now without weakening our future? Of course, this whole system carries risks. Smoke too hot and fast, and you cook the outside while leaving the inside moist and vulnerable. Hang meat in a spot where smoke doesn't quite reach, or where air doesn't circulate, and you invite mould, hidden pockets of rot. Let the fire die too often, and the drying process might stall. So someone in the house, consciously or not, keeps an eye not just on the warmth of the hearth for comfort, but on the quality of the smoke for preservation. They feed it with wood that burns in the right way, not too resinous, not too fast. They avoid tossing certain things into the flames that might taint the food above. The rhythm of fuel and ember is guided by both immediate needs and long-term ones. In the low light you can see smoke swirling around a ham, as if tasting it, testing it. You can see women glance up at the rafters as they move about their work, checking positions, noting any strange colour. Maybe they shift a piece of meat a little, turning it, bringing one side more into the stream of smoke. Tiny adjustments, learned not from books, but from winters survived and winters lost. This transformation of the whole house into a smoke chamber is as much a mental adaptation as a physical one. It means accepting that your living space will always be a little dark, a little suffocating, your walls and beams stained and sticky. It means living with the constant, clinging scent of your own food in progress. If you were transported here from a modern home, you might cough, your eyes watering, complain that you can barely see across the room. But to these people, the smoke is not just irritation, it is insurance. It means their roof beams are less likely to be eaten by insects. It means their meat above will be there in a month. It is, in a very real sense, the smell of safety. When outsiders write later about smoked meat, it's easy to picture a separate little hut somewhere, a dedicated smokehouse, where someone hangs sausages occasionally. The reality, here, in the core of this longhouse, is more intense. This is not a side project. This is central architecture, bent to a single purpose, pushing back against the speed of decay. So now you can follow the chain from field to rafters, grass to animals, animal to slaughter, slaughter to feast and work, work to hang, hanging to slow, smoky curing, curing to thin slices in the coldest, hungriest weeks. Each step is necessary. Each step is threaded through with risk and judgment. And yet for all their skill, for all their adaptation of fire into a chemical weapon against rot, the Vikings are still at the mercy of things they cannot completely control. The weather, the quality of their salt, the length of the winter. What happens when the air is too wet? When weeks of thaw make smoke cling wrong and mould bloom where it shouldn't? What happens when salt is too rare to use on every vulnerable cut? Or when, despite all their planning, the winter still stretches on longer than the meat overhead can safely last? That's when they cross an invisible line. When cooking and drying are no longer enough, they step into a stranger territory, into the world of controlled rot, where the difference between poison and preservation comes down to a few crucial choices and a lot of courage. There is a line every human has in their head about food. On one side of it are things you look at and think, yes, that's edible. On the other side are things you look at and think, that's gone bad. In the Viking world, especially on the harsh edges of their world, Greenland, Iceland, the far Norwegian coasts, that line had to move. Sometimes it had to disappear entirely. Picture the shore of Iceland or Greenland on a day when the wind is a knife. The ocean is dark steel, the sky only a shade lighter. The ground is rock, moss and snow. Fields are tiny, soil thin. You cannot plant your way out of this environment. You have animals, yes, and you have the sea. But even the sea can betray you. Nets come up light. Weather keeps boats on land, and then someone drags a shark up on the shore. Not just any shark, a Greenland shark, a sluggish, deep-dwelling giant. Its flesh is pale, almost translucent. It looks like salvation, but there is a cruel joke buried in that meat. Fresh, it is toxic. Its tissues are full of compounds that help. It survived crushing depths and freezing water, but will poison a human who eats it. Most cultures would stop there. Not for us, they would say, and walk away. The Vikings did not. Someone, sometime, did something desperate and curious. They cut the shark into pieces and did not eat it right away. Maybe they noticed that dead sharks washed ashore and left for a long time smelled different, less sharp, less burning to the nose. Maybe they watched scavengers pick at old carcasses and live. Maybe they simply had nothing else and were willing to gamble. So they took the meat and buried it. Imagine digging a pit in gravelly wet ground. The soil is cold, your fingers numb quickly. You lay the chunks of shark in, layer them, maybe add stones or heavy boards on top, and then cover the whole thing with earth. You have, in effect, built a primitive press. The weight above slowly squeezes fluid out of the meat into the surrounding ground. You walk away. Weeks pass, months. The shark is down there, in darkness, in its own juices, in a low-oxygen, cold environment. Inside those chunks, something remarkable is happening. The toxins that made the meat dangerous, compounds like urea and other nitrogenous waste, begin to break down, to drain away, to be transformed by slow chemical reactions and microbial activity. It is, in blunt terms, rotting, but not the wild, uncontrolled rot that turns things into slime and death. It is a guided decomposition. Eventually, the meat is dug up. It does not look like it did when it went in. It is firmer, its surface changed, its smell formidable. Ammonia fumes rise when you cut into it, stinging your eyes, burning your nose, as if you had leaned over a bucket of strong cleaning fluid. Your body recoils. Every instinct says, no, but you are not done yet. The chunks are sliced into smaller pieces and hung to dry in the cold, clean air for more weeks. Wind whips around them. Birds might try to investigate, but even they may hesitate at the smell. Slowly, the outer surface dries, hardens. More moisture leaves. When the process is finally considered complete, what you have is hakal, fermented shark, cubes of pale, waxy meat that, when cut open, still release that potent ammonia ghost. To a modern visitor, the first bite is often treated like a dare. Your eyes water, your throat tightens, your brain screams that this is not food. To someone standing on that shore centuries ago, in a world where winter has teeth and the next resupply ship may never come, this is something else. Victory. A toxic animal has been turned into a source of protein and fat that can last for months. What was once inedible is now a tool. The logic behind it is the same logic that runs quietly through so much of Viking preservation. Use certain bacteria to beat others in a race. Encourage conditions, acidic, salty, low oxygen, cool, where the microbes that create safe, stable products flourish, while those that cause dangerous, putrefying, rot falter. Fermentation is essentially saying to the microscopic world, we are going to pick the winners. You can see this in milder, more familiar examples too. The sour tang of fermented milk, the fizz of ale. But here, with sharks, with certain fish, the Vikings are playing at the very edge of what's possible. One misjudgment of time, temperature, or environment can mean the difference between survival and sickness. Not all these rotten miracles are so extreme. Travel inland and upward into the Norwegian mountains, away from the sea spray and bogs, and you find another tradition. Fish like trout, cleaned and lightly salted, then packed tightly into barrels or wooden boxes. Not enough salt to fully preserve them in the classic sense, just enough to tip the scales. The fish are layered, perhaps with a little weight on top, and left in a cold place. Over weeks and months, something begins to happen. The natural bacteria on and in the fish especially lactic acid bacteria, wake up in this low oxygen, mildly salty environment. They begin breaking down sugars and producing acid. The barrel becomes its own closed universe. The brine grows cloudy, the smell grows strong. The fish soften, their bones turning nearly edible, their flesh becoming a paste-like mass. This is rakfisk, fermented fish. Take off the lid after many weeks, and your senses are assaulted. To someone unprepared, it smells like a mistake, like something forgotten behind a stove. But again, look past your instincts and see the pattern. The acid produced by those bacteria pushes the environment in a direction where pathogens cannot easily take hold. The low temperature slows everything down. The salt keeps the most aggressive spoilage organisms at bay. Inside that reeking barrel is meat that can be eaten in the depths of winter, without anyone ever having lit a fire under it. Further east, and later in time, you see the same idea explode into infamous form as surströmming. Baltic herring salted just enough not to rot, then sealed to ferment. Barrels that bulge, tins that hiss when opened. The smell strong enough to clear yards. Its roots, though, stretch back into this era and this mindset. Accept that rot can be both enemy and ally, and learn to nudge it where you need it. You might be tempted to laugh, watching from a safe distance, to say, who would eat that? The better question is, what kind of pressure does it take to make a whole culture agree that this is not just edible, but worthy of tradition? Imagine a winter when the sea has been cruel. Storm after storm has kept boats on land. Nets, when thrown, come back half empty. The dried fish in the storeroom is running low. Fresh meat is too valuable to touch. The remaining animals needed alive for milk and breeding. Grain is rationed so thin you can see the bottom of the pot. In the corner of the cellar, though, there is a barrel. Its sides are stained, its lid swollen slightly from the gases building inside. Everyone in the house knows what is in there. They smelled it when it was first being packed. Maybe they've smelled it in other winters, when there was no need to open it, no need to cross that line. This year, there is a need. The lid is pried off. A rush of smell erupts into the air, sharp and sour, heavy and animal. People turn their heads away for a second, eyes watering, throats tightening. And then, after that first instinctive recoil, they lean back in. They look. They evaluate. Is their mould of the wrong colour? Is the texture what it should be? Does the smell, beneath its violence, carry the note they've learned to associate with safe enough? Generations before them have done this. The ones who guessed wrong did not leave many descendants. The ones who guessed right handed down a practiced intuition. Pieces are lifted out, perhaps rinsed, perhaps not. Maybe they're eaten with flatbread, maybe with butter, maybe with raw onion or some other strong flavour to keep the senses occupied. The first bite is the hardest. Your mouth is confused, your nose protests, but your stomach understands the language being spoken. Calories, protein, fat. This is not restaurant food. This is not comfort food. This is war food. War against the length of winter. War against the unpredictability of weather. And here is where the horrible in those horrible winter nights takes on a new meaning. It's not just the cold that is horrible, it compromises survival demands. The willingness to look at a barrel of fish that smells like a dare and say, yes, we will eat this, we will live. Fermented shark, rakfisk, proto-surströmming, all of these are expressions of a single brutal truth. If your environment is unforgiving enough, the boundary between food and disgust becomes negotiable. Smell is no longer a simple yes-no signal. It becomes a complex map. One note says danger, another says safety, a third, strangely, says tradition. For children growing up in this world, these foods do not begin as trials. They begin as pieces of normal. A father might put a tiny cube of hakal in a child's hand, laugh at the face they make, and tell them a story about a winter when that smell meant the difference between hunger and strength. A barrel of fermented fish might be opened only on certain occasions, its appearance at the table remembered for years. In that way, what began as desperate improvisation slowly hardens into culture. What was once, this is all we have, becomes, over time, This is what we eat. The survival tactic becomes identity. Stand far enough back, and you can see the same pattern in milder forms in most human cultures. Cheeses with rinds that smell like feet, aged meats that would have horrified a more delicate stomach, vegetables buried or brined until their original flavour is almost unrecognisable. The Vikings are simply doing this at the edge of the map, under the harshest possible constraints. Fermentation on the edge is a kind of pact with time. You agree to let your food partially break down, in exchange for it not breaking down entirely. You accept ugliness, odour, and a measure of risk, so that when the world outside turns hostile, you are not completely at its mercy. Look back across what you've seen so far. Grains stretched into porridge and hard bread, milk turned into curds and butter, fish turned into boards of protein, meat darkened and hardened in smoke, and now this, shark that once would have killed you, fish that smells like a dare, both transformed into something that keeps you breathing. If this is what they ate willingly, knowing exactly how it would hit their nose, imagine what they turned to when even the fermented barrels and bog butter started to run out. Before winter turns the world into a black and white sketch, there is one last rush of colour. It doesn't look like much next to the drama of slaughter days and cod runs. There are no roaring fires, no forests of hanging fish, no barrels bulging with fermenting sharks. Just people bent over fields and forest floors, hands in the dirt, eyes searching the ground. Quiet work, low to the earth. These are the last gifts of autumn. Down in a corner of the field, where the soil is good and the land has been coaxed into giving a little more each year, something waits beneath the surface. The leaves above may already be yellowing, bitten by the first light frosts, but the real treasure is hidden below. Imagine a hand on the handle of a wooden spade cutting into the cold earth. The soil is damp, heavy. It clings to the blade and the boots. A plant is grasped low, near the base of its leaves, and gently pulled as the spade lifts. Out of the ground comes a shape that might look familiar. A rutabaga, a turnip, a primitive ancestor of the carrots you know. Knobby, muddy, imperfect, but firm, solid. There is nothing glamorous about a turnip. You don't write poetry about it. But in this world, you might say a prayer over it. Rutabagas and turnips are stubborn things. They grow where other crops sulk. They swell quietly underground, ignoring wind and rain. When frost kills the greens above, the root below shrugs and waits. That toughness is exactly what makes them so valuable. Harvest time for these vegetables is a kind of race. Pull them too early, and you waste potential growth. Wait too long, and a sudden hard freeze can damage them, turning firm flesh into watery mush. So people watch the skies, test the ground, walk the rows with their hands brushing the leaves, reading tiny signs in colour and texture, the way another person might read a book. Once the roots are up, they're not washed, not properly. The worst of the dirt is brushed off, but a thin film of earth is left clinging to the skin like a second, gritty cloak. Washing them clean would feel more satisfying, more civilized, but it would also strip away a natural layer of protection. The skin would soften, microcracks would open, rot would find an easier way in. Instead, the roots are sorted. The damaged ones, the forked and bruised and bitten, are set aside to be eaten first. They will not keep. The solid, symmetrical, unblemished ones are treated like the long-term guests they are. Now we go underground again. The root cellar is not pretty. It wasn't built to impress. It was built to hold on. Its air is cool, sometimes almost icy, but never quite freezing. The light that reaches it, if any, is dull and grey. This is where time goes slow. Inside, boxes and pits are prepared. At the bottom, a layer of dry sand or moss is spread. The roots are laid in carefully, each one given its own space. They must not touch. One rotten spot can leap across skins like a rumour, turning a whole cache into mush if you're careless. More sand, more roots, more moss, layer on layer, until the box is full. Then it is left. No, not left, guarded, because what you see here is not just vegetables. It is thickeners for winter soups, ballast for empty stomachs, vitamins that no one has ever heard by name but knows by result. slower sickness, more energy, less collapse. Weeks later, when the world above has turned white and hard, someone will open that cellar and lift a turnip out of the sand. It will emerge like a buried stone, faintly marked by the grains around it. Cut it open, and it will still be crisp, still smell faintly of earth and pepper. Picture a pot on the fire in midwinter. The base is water and maybe a little whey, perhaps a piece of dried fish or a shaving of smoked meat from the rafters. Then in go the chopped roots, rutabaga, turnip, wild carrots, maybe a scrap of cabbage from a head that has been slowly diminishing in the cellar. The pot simmers for hours, turning hard cubes into soft, yielding chunks. Someone ladles it out into bowls. Look closely at one serving. There is only one piece of visible meat, a small cube of lamb or sliver of pork, floating like an island in a sea of steaming vegetables. To the eye, it might seem almost stingy, but to the people at this table, this bowl is a victory, not a disappointment. Every root in that stew made it from seed to harvest without rotting in the ground. Every piece survived storage without succumbing to mould or frost. The smoked meat above the fire dried properly, didn't sour, didn't fall. The fuel for the fire was cut, carried and guarded. Each spoonful is the end of a long chain of correct decisions. You might consider it a poor man's meal. They consider it a success. And tucked into all of this, often forgotten when we imagine Viking life as endless meat and mead, is the steady background rhythm of plants. Leaves, stems, seeds, roots. Quiet supporting cast members, without which the main actors would collapse. But the field is only one half of this chapter. The other half lives in the forest. From the edge of the settlement, the trees look like a dark wall. Pine, spruce, birch, an unbroken army of trunks fading into grey. But to the people who live here, this is not a barrier. It is a pantry without walls. In late summer and early autumn, the forest is a frenzy of quiet activity. Whole families move through the undergrowth, baskets in hand, eyes sharp. They walk the same routes their grandparents did, paths invisible to anyone who doesn't know what to look for. Under certain trees, they look for hazel bushes. Forest nuts, hazelnuts, grow here in clusters, encased in soft, leafy husks. Kids scramble to reach them, fingers nimble, some nuts dropped, some crammed into mouths, the rest dutifully collected. Crack one open in your mind. The shell is hard, but once broken, the nut inside is pale, oily, satisfying. This is compact energy, fat and protein in a form that doesn't rot quickly, doesn't require special storage beyond dryness and a cool place. Back in the longhouse, these nuts are dumped into sacks or wooden boxes and tucked into corners where the air stays dry. Months later, when snow is piled high outside, someone can reach into that sack and pull out a handful of autumn. Chewed slowly, nut by nut, they offer a different kind of richness than porridge. Dense, slow-burning fuel that keeps the body going just a little longer. Nuts can be ground into paste, added to bread dough, sprinkled into porridge. They are food and flavour and medicine against monotony, all at once. Then there are the berries. The forest floor and bog edges blaze with small reds and golds when the time is right. Lingonberries, cranberries, cloudberries, even wild raspberries, where the land is kinder. Children's hands come back stained, mouths too, despite warnings to save more than you eat. Adults are only a little better. The temptation is everywhere. Berries bring something that most winter food lacks. Sharpness, brightness, a mouthful of remembered summer. But they are delicate. Leave them out and they collapse into mould and vinegar. So the Vikings found ways to pin them in place. One method is simple, drying. Berries are spread out on flat surfaces. Rocks, boards, the lip of a low roof, where the sun can reach them and the wind can lick their moisture away. Turned, watched, protected from birds. They wrinkle and shrink. A dried berry is not pretty. It resembles a piece of leather more than a fruit. But toss a handful into a pot of stew or porridge in January, and the rehydrated pieces bring back that flash of sour sweetness the tongue barely remembers. Another method is quieter and more mysterious to modern eyes. Water preservation. Take a barrel, fill it with clean, cold water, ideally from a source you trust. Pour in lingonberries or cranberries, enough to cover the bottom thickly. The berries sink and float, jostle gently. Their own natural acids begin to shift the pH of the water around them. They are not sealed away from the world the way something in a salt brine or vinegar bath would be, but they are, in a way, suspended. In the cold of the root cellar, that barrel waits. The water stays clear. The berries, remarkably, keep their shape and firmness for a long time. Scoop some out months later, and they still pop under your teeth, still bleed red across your tongue. Sometimes, when honey is available in enough quantity to spare, berries are boiled in it. This is not everyday food. This is a celebration, trapped in a jar. The result is syrupy, sweet, intensely flavoured. That jar will be opened on special days, midwinter feasts, weddings, important gatherings, spooned onto bread or into bowls like edible sunlight. Walk back into the longhouse in your mind. Look up, meat in the rafters. Look around, grain in sacks, fish boards stacked, barrels of dairy in corners. Look closer, and you see the smaller things, bunches of herbs hanging from beams. Wild cumin, angelica, nettles, yarrow. These are not just decorations. In an age before pills and labels, plants are medicine, seasoning, and mood. A few dried nettle leaves might be crumbled into a soup for their minerals. Wild garlic, crushed and added to stews, brings a sharpness that cuts through the heaviness of fat. Angelica and other herbs are boiled into teas when people cough, when stomachs cramp, when winters feel too long. These dried bundles represent a different kind of foresight. Someone in summer looked at a patch of green and didn't just see weeds. They saw future flavour, future healing, and bent to gather, tie, hang and forget until needed. All of these forest secrets and last field gifts settle into the fabric of the longhouse so seamlessly that it is easy to overlook them. But imagine removing them, one by one. Take away the roots from the cellar, and the stew becomes thin. Grain and water, nothing more. Bodies get weaker, missing not just calories but small crucial nutrients that fend off sickness. Take away the nuts, and there is no quick handful of fuel on a long day. No concentrated fat to mix into dough. Take away the berries, and winter becomes flatter, taste and spirit both. Take away the herbs, and every illness becomes more dangerous, every pot more monotonous. In a world of extremes, fermented shark, smoked meat, stockfish, it is these humble plants that often make the difference between surviving and merely not dying. They fill the gaps. They keep the body from slipping too far into deficiency. They feed not just flesh, but morale. A bowl of stew heavy with roots, flecked with herbs, maybe finished with a spoon of butter or a scatter of dried berries, is not the sort of thing a saga will sing about. But in the quiet ledger of winter, it is one of the most important entries. As you watch a family eat such a meal on a dark evening, snow pressing against the walls, it becomes clear that survival here is not one big dramatic act. It is an accumulation of small thoughtful acts months earlier. A root buried in sand, a nut dropped into a sack, a berry sunk in water, a herb tied in a bundle. Even the cups they drank from were part of the survival plan. Because in a world where water can kill you, the safest drink is one that's already a little bit spoiled. On those horrible winter nights, when the wind sounds like it's trying to peel the roof off, and the stew in the pot is more water than anything else. Survival isn't only about what you chew, it's also about what you drink. In your world, having a drink might mean pleasure, habit, or escape. Here in this longhouse, it is strategy. Look around the room as evening deepens. Bowls are emptied, spoons scraped along wooden sides to catch the last smear of fat, the last soft chunk of root. The fire is fed just enough to push back the worst of the cold. People shift, sigh, roll their shoulders. Their bodies are technically fed, but not satisfied. There is a difference. Then someone stands and moves toward a corner where a barrel waits. The mood in the room changes almost imperceptibly. Backs straighten a little. Conversations pick up. Children watch with that sharp, hungry gaze reserved for any moment that might mean more. The barrel is tapped. A cloudy, straw-coloured liquid pours into wooden cups and horn mugs. Ale. Forget the crystal-clear, high-alcohol beer of modern pubs. This ale is different. It is low in alcohol, perhaps only 2 or 3%, sometimes less. It is cloudy with suspended grain particles and yeast. It is not glamorous. It is, quite literally, liquid bread. Every part of its existence is a risk and a calculation. To make ale you need grain. Barley is best. You soak it in water, tricking it into thinking it should sprout. As it begins to germinate, tiny roots pushing out, the grain unlocks starch and starts turning it into sugar, the energy a young plant would use to grow. Before that process goes too far, you halt it by drying the grain, sometimes over gentle heat. What you end up with is malt, barley that now carries accessible sugars. It is the difference between a hard, inert seed and something that can feed not just a plant, but a yeast culture. The malt is crushed, coarsely ground. Then it is mixed with hot water, creating a thick mash. This is where the room begins to smell. Familiar to you, even across centuries, the sweet warm aroma of malted grain, somewhere between bread dough and porridge. The mash is held at certain temperatures, not because anyone has a thermometer, but because generations of experience have taught them what feels right. Too cool, and the grain doesn't yield its sugar. Too hot, and you kill the enzymes that make that transformation possible. They may not know the words, but they know the consequences. After a while, the liquid is drained off. This is the worst. Sugar-rich grain tea. It is boiled. Boiling does many things at once. It concentrates flavour, changes the chemistry of the grain components, and crucially, kills most of the wild microbes that might otherwise claim this sugary feast for themselves in ways that would make you very sick. In later centuries and places, hops will be added for bitterness and preservation. Here it might be other herbs, yarrow, bog myrtle, wormwood, that lend bite and help keep certain bacteria at bay. The exact mix varies from farm to farm, valley to valley. Then the wort is cooled and transferred to a fermenting vessel, a barrel, a large tub, a sturdy wooden trough. Yeast enters the scene. Sometimes it's added from a previous successful batch, a kind of cherished starter. Sometimes it arrives floating invisibly on the air, colonizing the sweet liquid on its own. If all goes well, the surface begins to foam. Tiny bubbles rise. The brew smells alive, bready, fruity, sometimes a little sour. Yeast is turning sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide, pushing back against other microbes that might want to rot the whole thing into undrinkable slime. If things go badly, if the temperature is wrong, if unwanted bacteria get the upper hand, if the herbs weren't right, you find out when you lift the lid. The wrong smell, the wrong texture, a surface that looks off. You can't afford to get this wrong, because what you've put at risk here is not some spare sack of grain. It is precious calories you could have eaten as porridge or baked into bread. You've taken solid, reliable food and turned it into a liquid that now has to justify itself. When it does, when the ale is good, it pays back that risk. A cup of this cloudy drink carries a surprising amount of energy. Tiny particles of grain still float in it. Yeast cells themselves are full of nutrients. The alcohol is low enough that you can drink it all day without losing your grip on reality, but high enough to help kill off some pathogens and extend the ale's life beyond what plain grain water could hope for. And there is another benefit that matters more than modern people like to admit. It feels good. On a night when the wind rattles the door and the same root stew you ate yesterday is back in your bowl again, a warm cup of ale in your hands does something a little beyond the physical. It loosens the tightness in your shoulders. It softens the edges of hunger that still linger at the bottom of your stomach. It takes the chill out of your chest in a way plain water never could. Water here is not automatically safe. Wells can be contaminated. Surface water can carry disease from animals and people upstream. You can't look at a cup and see bacteria. If you get it wrong, the punishment might be a day of weakness or the start of something much worse. Ale, boiled and fermented, is statistically safer. That's not how they would say it, but that's what their bodies learn. You drink water and sometimes people get sick. You drink ale, and more often than not, they don't. Habits form, culture follows. Watch the room after the cups are filled. The first sips are almost always quiet. The taste, grainy, slightly sour, sometimes bitter from herbs, fills the mouth. The warmth spreads down the throat and into the belly. People breathe out with a different sound than before, a kind of small relief. Then, slowly, the volume rises. Stories begin. Jokes that wouldn't have surfaced when everyone was cold and dry finally claw their way out. The same pot of stew that seemed disappointing a moment ago now sits in a glow of shared satisfaction. This is where psychology and survival start to tangle together. On paper, ale is calories, hydration, and relative microbiological safety in one mug. But in the lived experience of these people, it is also companionship. It is an excuse and structure for ritual. Someone raises their cup and speaks a name, a god, an ancestor, the household's luck itself. Others echo. A toast becomes a moment of collective attention. We are here. We are still alive. We drink to that fact. The act of clinking cups, of drinking in unison, binds the group. Shared hardship tastes different when washed down together. The thinness of the stew is less noticeable if you laugh between bites, if you punctuate the meal with little bursts of ceremony. You can make even scarcity feel like something else if you wrap it in ritual. Now contrast this with something much rarer, something that does not flow freely. Mead. Honey is not a staple here. It is a gift that arrives in small, golden amounts. Bees need flowers, good weather, and safe hives. Some years are generous, others are stingy. Honey is medicine, sweetener, offering. It is not something you casually tip into a porridge pot. To take honey and ferment it into mead is to make a deliberate choice to turn pure sweetness into something deeper and more intoxicating. Honey, mixed with water and perhaps herbs or fruit, is left to ferment. Yeast, again, does its work, converting sugar into alcohol. The result, when aged even a little, is stronger than ale, sweeter, more perfumed. Mead is not a daily drink. It is a festival fire in liquid form. A barrel of mead might sit untouched for months, even years, its contents evaporating slightly through the wood, its flavour deepening. People know it is there. Children hear about it in whispers. Will open that when your sister marries, when the midwinter sacrifice comes, when the harvest is truly saved. On an ordinary horrible winter night, when you are simply trying to get through the dark, ale is enough. But on certain nights, when the dark feels like it has gone on too long, when morale is thin and faces are worn, someone makes a different decision. The mead barrel is rolled out, the seal is broken. The smell that rises is rich in a way nothing else in the house can compete with. Honey, fermentation, a hint of flowers that bloomed long ago. For a moment, the room is not a smoke-stained box holding out against the cold. It is a hall in a story. Cups are filled more carefully this time. Mead can topple you if you treat it like ale. Everyone knows someone who once drank too deeply and paid for it with a sore head and a day lost. But the very danger of its strength is part of its draw. People sit a little straighter, a different kind of toast begins. Not just to make it through winter, but to the good things that still exist. Births, marriages, successful hunts, safe returns. The moments that remind everyone that life is not merely rationing and grinding and counting sacks in the cellar. Under the influence of mead, the stories get bigger. The ancestors loom larger. The gods feel closer. A harsh year is reframed, not erased, but placed inside a bigger narrative. We have survived worse. From a purely practical standpoint, does mead help you survive winter? Not in the way barley porridge or stockfish does. You do not live on mead. But in another sense, its role is just as critical. It marks the boundaries of something important, joy, meaning, the idea that you are not just a stomach to be filled, but a person in a community with reasons to endure. The psychology of eating in this world is never separate from the psychology of drinking. Thin food feels richer when washed down with something more complex than water. Ritualized drinking, ale most nights, mead on rare ones, turns each evening from another bowl of stew into a moment in a story. Raise a cup in your imagination, feel the warmth in your hand, the heat from the fire on your face, the press of bodies at your sides. Listen to the way voices overlap, the way laughter flares and dies back, the way someone in the corner hums a snatch of an old song. This is not luxury, this is medicine for the mind. Without it, the numbers might still work. Calories in versus calories out. But something else would fail. The will. The sense that all this grinding, storing, fermenting, smoking, digging is for something. Ale, then, is more than liquid bread. Mead is more than fermented honey. Together, they are tools the Vikings use, not just against thirst or disease, but against despair. They make thin porridge feel like a meal. Make bare benches feel like a hall, turn a dark, icy night into a gathering, instead of a slow, lonely slide into fear. But there was a point in every bad year when even liquid bread and clever storage failed. That's when the Vikings reached for foods that weren't really foods at all. There is a part of winter that has no name in most calendars, but everyone here feels it coming long before it arrives. For months, the system has worked. The longhouse machine you've walked through in this story. Grain in sacks, fish on racks, meat in smoke, dairy in cellars, roots in sand, berries in water, ale in barrels, has done its job. Bowls have never been full, but they have not been empty. Then the balance tips. It doesn't happen overnight. It comes in little changes that only the people who have lived through too many winters notice. A pot of porridge that seems a little thinner than last week. A ladle that dips lower into a barrel and finds more bottom than expected. The sound of a hand reaching into a grain sack and feeling less resistance. Maybe the winter will be longer this year. Maybe a storm took down the fish racks early. Maybe an animal that was supposed to breed died before it could. Whatever the cause, there is a moment when someone in this house, usually the one who has been doing the quiet arithmetic of food all season, realizes that the numbers no longer work. The cellars echo. You've been down there before in imagination and seen boxes packed with roots, barrels crowded with berries, jars full of tangy curds. Picture that same space now, with half the containers gone. Empty prints in the sand where turnips once lay. A barrel of berries that is more water than fruit. A corner where the last sack of grain sits alone, its sides not firm and round, but sagging inward. This is the famine gap. Outside, the calendar says that winter should be loosening its grip, but the snow on the ground does not care what month it is. The nights are still long. The sun is still a pale stranger. The first green shoots have not appeared. Animals are still eating stored hay. The world has not restarted its supply chain. Inside, the stored winter is almost gone. There are days or weeks to go before fresh food appears, and days or weeks of food missing from the ledger. You cannot squeeze grain from snow. You cannot pull fish from a frozen fjord without risking your life on rotten ice. You cannot conjure meat from animals that must be kept alive, or you will starve later. So you turn to things that, in any other season, would not be food. Bark bread is the name history gives it, but that phrase is too gentle. It sounds like a quaint recipe. It is not. It is an act of surrender and defiance at the same time. Picture people in the forest with knives and axes, standing in front of pine or birch trees. They are not cutting them down, not taking the whole trunk. That would be too costly. The forest is more than food. It is fuel and shelter and barrier. Instead, they peel. The outer bark, rough, hard, dead, is stripped away in patches. Underneath it is a thin, pale layer, the cambium. This is the living part of the tree, the place where growth happens, where nutrients move up and down. It is soft, slightly moist, patterned with faint lines. Cut it away carefully and it comes off in strips. Eat it raw and you will find almost nothing to love. It is woody, fibrous and barely digestible. But in a world where the cellar has turned into a cave of echoes, barely is still something. Back in the longhouse, these strips are dried by the fire. The green, living smell that clung to them fades into something more papery. Then they are ground, pounded with stones or worked in querns that were never meant for such strange grain. The result is a coarse, brownish flour that smells like a forest floor in late autumn. No one makes bread from bark alone if they can help it. It is mixed with whatever real flour remains: rye, barley, oats. In a bad year, the ratio might be 1 part grain to 3 parts bark. In a terrible year, even less. Water is added. The dough is heavy, sticky and resistant. It does not rise. It barely wants to come together at all. This bread bakes on hot stones or in pans, just like better loaves did months ago. But when it comes off the heat, the difference is obvious. It is hard, dark, it smells faintly of resin and smoke. Break it and it splinters more than it tears. You need strong teeth and a strong will to chew it. This is not a food you eat with joy. This is something you put in your mouth because the alternative is nothing. Roots and moss follow. People go back to the ground in other ways, digging for anything that can be coaxed into giving a calorie. Wild roots that were ignored in better months are suddenly precious, bitter, fibrous, filled with compounds that might make your stomach complain, but still offer some energy. Moss, lichen, strange low plants scraped from rocks. All of these enter the pot now, boiled once, twice, 3 times to leach out the worst of their bitterness or toxins. They become a grey-green mass that smells like wet stones and desperation. If there is a scrap of fat left, a spoon of whey, a corner of dried meat, it is stirred into this mush to trick the body into accepting it. Children are told it is soup. Their faces say they know better. Then there is leather. In the corner hangs an old belt, an ancient strap from a harness, a piece of shoe that no longer has a mate. Under normal circumstances, these things are not food. They are tools or trash. In famine, they become potential. Leather is skin. Skin is protein, and fat, though bound up in a form, the body cannot easily access. To make it yield anything, you must half destroy it first. Pieces are cut, washed to remove as much dirt as possible, then boiled. Long, hours, days if there is fuel to spare. The pot is kept on the edge of the fire, bubbling gently. The water grows cloudy. A smell rises that is not entirely appetizing, something between broth and old boots. Slowly the leather softens. Fibres loosen. If you are lucky, some of the collagen and remaining fat leach into the water, turning it into a thin, sticky broth that coats the mouth and convinces the stomach it has seen something like food. People fish out the sludge with resigned hands. They chew pieces of leather that bend instead of crack now, swallowing not because it is good, but because it is better than emptiness. At this point, survival no longer looks anything like the heroic, noisy image that clings to the word Viking. There are no axes raised against foreign foes here, no burning monasteries, no songs shouted over clashing shields. There are just quiet, gaunt faces in the half-dark, eating things they would not even have called food in any other season. All the systems we have walked through, the careful architecture of storage under the floorboards, the grain rationing, the dairy alchemy, the fish drying, the meat smoking, the rotten miracles of fermentation, the last gifts of the forest, are designed for one purpose: to push this moment as far back on the calendar as possible, or avoid it altogether. Most years they succeed, the careful ones, the households where someone is always counting, always watching, always planning. Come close to the edge, but don't go over. Bark stays on trees, leather stays on belts, moss stays on rocks. But some years are too cruel. A failed harvest here, a disease in the herd there, an early freeze, a late spring. The kind of stacked misfortune that is invisible to history, but brutally clear in the memory of anyone who lived through it. In those years, even the best planning leads here. The line between life and death becomes a millimetre thick. Look closely at a family around the fire in a famine week. Bodies that once felt solid now seem made of sharp angles. Cheeks hollow, eyes too big, movements slowed to conserve energy, talking less because talking burns calories. Yet the work cannot stop. Animals still need to be fed, firewood still has to be brought in, Tools, clothes, and boats still need repair. The world will not pause for them. A child asks, "When will the green come back?" The answer is honest and useless. Soon. And then, soon becomes today. And the first shoots finally appear, along the edges of thawing ground. Thin blades of grass, tiny leaves unfurling, buds swelling on bare branches. Animals, starved for fresh forage, push and strain at their tethers. The famine gap closes. Those who made it through, who survived on bark bread and moss soup and leather broth, will carry the memory of that hunger for the rest of their lives. It will shape the way they look at a full root cellar decades later. It will shape how tightly they tie off a grain sack, how sternly they scold a child for wasting a crust. It will be the ghost that stands behind every decision to bury butter in bogs or hang a few extra fish on the racks. Now, pull your mind back to where you are. Look around at your own world for a moment. Fridges humming quietly, shelves lined with boxes and cans, delivery vans hissing to a stop outside with fresh produce in winter. Being hungry often means that lunch was late. We have no food in the house. Usually means nothing we feel like eating. It is not that our lives are free of hardship or fear, but the specific terror of watching a cellar empty while the snow stays deep, of scraping living tissue off a tree to stretch a meal, of boiling your own shoes. Most of us will never know that. When we think of Vikings, our minds go first to raiding and conquering, to ships with dragon heads and shields along the sides, to images of raw strength and fearless violence. There is some truth there, but the real genius and terror of their world may lie elsewhere, not in what they burned, but in what they swallowed. In the willingness to eat fish that smelled like a dare, meat hardened in smoke until it was almost stone, shark that once dripped poison, roots that fought every tooth, bread cut with the living skin of trees, and broth brewed from the last remaining strips of leather. Because somewhere behind those choices stood a smaller, softer thing, a child they were trying to keep alive. The longhouse is quiet now in your mind. The seasons spin again, running back through everything you've seen. Grain fields in weak northern sun, smoke rising from rafters, fish forests on the coast, people bent over berries, hands on querns, backs bent in cellars. All of it in service of one simple, unglamorous goal: to reach spring, to keep breathing. If this is what dinner looked like, what do you think medicine, pain relief, or shipboard meals were like? Comment what part shocked you most, suggest what Viking topic we should uncover next, and subscribe to Viking Times so you don't miss the next journey back into their world.